we want to remind investors to kind of understand that investing is all about long term. Wealth is created over a period of time, and hence we have been running this series where we have done discussion with many astute fund managers to know their perspective around various challenges as well as various opportunities that lie ahead. And in this regards, today we have amongst us Mr. Sushmit, who is the fund manager with Motilal Oswal Asset Management, and he is going to talk about a framework which Motilal Oswal has pioneered, which they popularly call as investing in VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We know that we are today living in a VUCA world, and hence there has to be a framework. There has to be some kind of sense around figuring out what are the trends, what are the businesses, and how to pick businesses which are kind of foolproof in the context of the fragile environment where we are living in. And that is the context of this presentation, and that is the context of this webinar. So, formal welcome to you, Sushmit, for this webinar. So, we'll be doing this presentation for 30 minutes, 35 minutes. You can take 40 minutes also. And then in the end, for last maybe 20 minutes, we'll be doing questions and answers. Over to you, Sushmit.
Yeah. Thank you, Kamal, and thank you on behalf of Motilal Oswal AMC as well for giving us this opportunity. Uh, this topic that we are going to go through is a very simple framework that we have kind of time tested across various crises, where we've seen, how every crisis works, and every crisis is different but same in a funny way, and what are the lessons that we can learn out of it. So just to dive straight into the presentation, uh, first of all, let's understand what is VUCA, right? It's a little important to understand what exactly VUCA is. As Kamal mentioned right at the beginning, VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. All these four factors, when they come together, and most of us are, especially in the last 10 years, almost every second or third year has seen a combination of all these four factors. But at Motilal Oswal, we call 2020 the mother of all VUCAs, because all that you could have imagined to go wrong has gone wrong, right? Starting with COVID-19, if you think about the three other big events that have happened, they all dwarf in front of COVID-19. But imagine if they would have happened standalone, they themselves would have been VUCA events. So the whole locust attack that happened, the ongoing tensions at the border with China, or the severe drop in auto sales and hence GDP getting exaggerated by COVID. So we call 2020 the mother of all VUCAs. This is not an easy year. This is not an easy environment, not only for businesses, but also for investors. This is a very, very tough environment. And to take cognizance of that, as Kamal rightly said, we should not get bogged down by this. It's very easy to give up and move on. Most of us don't give up in our jobs and businesses, so we don't see any reason that you should give up in investments as well. But what are the learnings that one can take through and see if you can make the next 10 years even 2%, 3% better in terms of compounding? So what really happens in VUCA is very simple. Broadly, in the good times, all businesses are great businesses, and only in the times of crisis or times of where VUCA plays out, do you have businesses being classified in what we call the three buckets. So one is very simple, which is fragile. Companies which don't have the wherewithal to survive the crisis, break in the crisis times. The second are companies that are robust, which means they withstand the crisis. They don't break, so they are like a strong tree who is able to face a gush wind. But the most interesting, and I think if we can all identify even 20-25% of our portfolio as anti-fragile, which is exact opposite of fragile, which is the fragile is things break when faced with pressure, and anti-fragile things get better when faced with pressure, right? So this is really what is the attempt with this framework that we're trying to achieve, saying that can we find 5, 7 businesses that are actually getting better because of this crisis. Uh, you know, the interesting thing is, I've always found a lot of similarity between crisis and floods, right? If any of you have lived in a village, whenever a flood comes into a village where there are not paka roads, yeah, the old roads get washed away, right? And in a way, new roads get formed. And that's what crisis is also about, right? The old ways of doing things or the old success stories get washed away, not because they were necessarily bad, but maybe because they did not align themselves to the changing time, or the crisis took away the style of business that they used to do. So I think every crisis is like a flood where the old way gets washed away and the new ways are upon us. The most important thing that we have to ensure as businesses, as investors, is we don't own companies at the end of the crisis where they are not relevant anymore. I'm sure a lot of you may have seen this photo. It became quite famous over Twitter a couple of months ago. My biggest takeaway from this photo was that, maybe this bridge, so this bridge was not built, by the way, knowing that the river is going to go away from the bridge, right? So this bridge was built with the right intentions, but some geographical conditions happened because of which the river decided to take a separate way. It could happen with all of us. As investors, our job is to ensure that we don't buy companies which end up like this bridge. So this is a very simple way of thinking about, what to avoid and what to buy coming out of a crisis. So here we present to you a very, very simple framework that most of you yourselves could implement sitting in your houses. What are the 3 C's of opportunities in crisis? We have studied, crisis starting from 1991 to 1999, 2000, 2002, 3, 2008, 9, and recently demonetization. I would say these are the big 5 economic crises that India has faced over its last 30-year history. And when we went through these crises, saw the winners, saw the losers, we came away with 3 C's. And what we realized is every crisis leads to consumer behavior changes. Every crisis. It's very, very subtle at the beginning, but it becomes very, very deep rooted. As years go by. One simple example that I can think of, which most of you can relate to, is very simply what happened post demonetization, when almost a lot of our friends and family decided that maybe physical assets is not safe after all, and financial assets are safer, right? So you saw this big wave of consumer behavior change towards financial savings. And you go back to every crisis, and I can give you examples of how consumer behavior changed after every crisis. The second is weakening competition. As you know, that rising tide lifts every boat. Only when the tide recedes do you know which boat has a leak, right? And I think this is the most apt, and we're already seeing it play out in India in a way that some of the largest retail chains or real estate players are having to fold up because they just don't have the uh, ability or the wherewithal to survive this crisis. So if you can find a sector where the competition is weakening and there is one player who's surviving and is actually getting stronger because the competition is weakening, you have a winner in there. The third is company specific innovation. Very simply put, a few companies are agile. They embrace the new way of doing things much faster, and that can lead to a significant differentiation within the industry for a company, right? So if you remember these 3 C's and look it from this lens, maybe you could come up with a few ideas to invest in. Consumer behavior nearly always changes after every crisis. Uh, Competition obviously always weakens in during crisis, and a few companies are able to innovate coming out of a crisis uh, very, very effectively, either because they're agile or they are fast. Again, company-specific innovation. I have a few examples later on, but one example that we can all relate to is classic Bajaj Finance coming out of 2008-9. Nobody wanted to touch two-wheeler lending. Nobody wanted to touch personal loans or consumer durable lending. Bajaj Finance said, "Can we innovate in terms of the way we check a person's credit worthiness?" So, just to give you a perspective, uh, somewhere in 2010, most of the leading banks used to have 10 or 15 data points to check a customer's credit worthiness. Bajaj Finance had 100. Today, that number for Bajaj Finance is 2,000. So, adapting technology when everybody is moving away led to this massive differentiation. Some examples of consumer behavior changes that we think is going to happen in India because of COVID in the next 4 or 5 years. One is very, very, close to all of our bodies and heart is healthcare. Almost everyone will agree when I say that all of us are going to become a lot more aware of our health, immunity, the kind of insurance policies we have, the kind of hospitals we visit, just everything, I think has taken a very different meaning in this crisis from a behavior perspective. The interesting thing is that India as a country spends only 3.5% as healthcare spend as a percentage of GDP. The interesting part is almost the other three major countries, which are China, US, and Japan, they also spent very near amounts when their per capita GDP was very close to ours. So it is not surprising that we spend very less. The interesting thing is over the next 10 years, as the country gets richer and eventually older, you will spend a lot more on healthcare. And there are different ways to play this healthcare space in India. You could play it through medicine, you could play it through hospitals, you can play it through diagnostics, or you could play it through insurance. One interesting thing about medicine I should leave you with is, we as a country in FY19, we sold more alcohol than medicine, right? So that's how small the pharmaceutical market in India is. We sold 1.5 lakh crore of alcohol and 1.4 lakh crore of medicine. Just kind of branching out from, diving deeper into one of the healthcare verticals would be insurance. Yeah, most of you, all of us know insurance, right? Thanks to LIC. But none of us have enough of the insurance. So it's a very funny thing that we all have insurance policy, but at the same time, we don't have enough cover. And that is what makes the space very interesting. As the policies have become cheaper and they have become more focused on the customer, we think you'll see a significant surge in protection or just the sum assured going up for every policyholder in India. As you can see, the protection gap in India is nearly 92%, which means that if we as individuals should have 100 rupees of sum assured, India has 10 rupees of sum assured, right? So we think this is a very, very big space, and you will see a lot more people being aware. It is just, I think the fact that we are all mortals got reminded to us on an everyday basis in the last 6 months, right? At some level, we all know we are mortals and, we all will die one day. But when it's reminded to you every day, it has a very different impact on the behavior of people. Weakening competition is the second C that I spoke about. The best example of this that is playing out in front of our eyes are two sectors. They have very little representation in stock markets, but I think that's where the opportunity is. First is foods. Most of you may have read this headline that I put out. Zomato's report, which said that 40% of restaurants may never open again. And the interesting thing about the food market in India is that this is over 4 lakh crore market. And just to give you a perspective, FMCG market is 4.5 lakh crores. So it's as big as the FMCG market, but because it's been fragmented, it's been unorganized, we've not seen a big leader come out and stake his claim in the space. The largest company in this space in India is Jubilant FoodWorks, also popularly known as Domino's Pizza Company. They have 1% market share of the foods industry, and they are the largest. What we think is there is opportunity for companies who will survive this crisis. Could be, even for example, Indian hotels. Most of you may have read how Indian hotels is more focused on their Taj food delivery than booking their rooms out. And so maybe Taj actually becomes a big food brand going forward. Maybe Jubilant gets into Chinese and biryani and whatnot as the space opens up. So we think this is a space where you're seeing significant competition weakening, and you have two or three players who are very strong and who have actually evolved during this time. The second space is very, very mouth-watering from a size perspective, but very difficult to invest because of the way most companies are, right? Which is real estate. As you can see in this crisis, 53% of developers have gone down in India in the last in the top 14 cities. This is the city-wise data. The interesting thing here is that real estate as a sector contributes to nearly 10% of India's GDP, and its representation in market cap of India is less than 0.5%, right? So at some level, this disconnect will have to resolve itself, and I think RERA is a step towards that, because as soon as you put a regulator in a sector, as soon as you make the sector friendlier to the organized sector, then it just changes the dynamics of the sector. And we've seen that with every sector, right? You remember how stockbroking was 30 years ago before SEBI and NSE became a force. You remember how telecom was. We used to, we've waited for 3 months, 6 months to get a telephone connection until the TRAI came about. It was impossible to get a personal loan before SARFAESI came about. So whenever a large sector gets a regulator, we think it changes the dynamics of the sector. And it comes at a time when just imagine half of real estate companies have shut down. And if I were to ask you today, if you were to buy your only house in your life, which are the five developers that you will trust? And you'll struggle to name the sixth one also, right? So imagine if we can get to invest in this sector, and these sectors are very, very big in developed markets, right? Real estate is a very, very big sector. So hopefully this space cleans up further, and we get an opportunity to invest in this sector. Third is company specific innovation. I've given a couple of examples here. The best example that I think that the best performance by any company during the COVID time was by Britannia. They did a phenomenal job in terms of supply chain, raw material procurement, getting their factory up and running, knowing what to produce, knowing how much to produce, so on and so forth. I could go on and on, but I think they did a fantastic job, much beyond our expectations. And the fact that they figured out that if you produce bigger packs, that is good enough, because people are going to stock up any which ways, right? It's a very simple thing, but to kind of imagine the planning that goes into where you have to change your supply chain, because you normally don't make big packs, right? You make typically the 10 rupee packs, and you have to change your supply chain, you change your factory lines, and get the whole organization geared towards it. So I think just managing the supply chain was a phenomenal job by Britannia. The second company specific innovation, I thought Big Basket did a great job along with a lot of consumer companies, FMCG companies, where I don't know if you read, but Big Basket has nearly turned profitable in the last 3 months. So I think if whichever company invested in more than one channel, right, which said that maybe e-commerce gets better at some point, they have taken really the advantage in these times. So these are the 3 C's to identify sectors or themes in coming out of a crisis, and you can use this across any crisis, and you can do a back test, and you can figure out if these work or not. It's worked for us very well. Consumer behavior changes, competition weakening, and company specific innovation. So these are 3 C's. Coming to, we figured out the sector. How do we figure out companies within the sector? We give you a very, we practice a very simple checklist inspired by Atul Gawande. 5-point checklist for every company that we even start looking at. First is that, does the company make positive operating cash flow? And I think in India, if you apply this rule with complete honesty and 100% fail safe, this takes away 95% of the bad apples coming into your portfolio, right? And why is operating cash flow positive? Think about it like running a house, right? If you were to borrow to run your house, you know that house is in trouble. It's as simple as that. If a company has to borrow to run its company, then there is something wrong, right? So positive operating cash flow. I'm not necessarily a proponent that all companies should be debt free. I think debt should be manageable, especially if the cost of debt keeps falling like it has. As equity shareholders, it's important that some companies who can lever up. So if net debt is around 2 to 3 years of cash flow, it's fine. ROE should be greater than 12%, which means that they generate. So every rupee that they're investing, it's good for the shareholders. Fourth is they should have some profit growth in the last 5 years. We don't want to buy a company because it's going to turn around. The most famous line in this was by Warren Buffett. He said, never marry to reform, right? So never buy a company because of the turnaround, right? Very few companies actually turn around, and their stories become very big because turnarounds are typically 100,000 baggers, but there are a lot of mortality that happens as well. So it's better to play safe and to buy companies which have delivered profit growth. And last simple check rule is make sure that number of suppliers and customers are many. It doesn't have to be in millions or thousands. It has to be a good enough number so that there is some bargaining power with the companies. Coming to the price, which is very, very important again. This is a wealth creation study that Mr. Ramdevji did a few years ago, and I think for me this has been the simplest tool to understand whether there is margin of safety in the company that you're buying or not. It's very simple. If anything has PEG greater than 3 times or PE greater than 50-60 times, it's better off if you don't buy the company, right? There are people who will make money beyond this also, but when you make rules, you don't make rule for the exception, right? You make rules for 80-90% of your behavior. You don't make it for the exception. So this is broadly the two guardrails that you could use to select a company. Or this is what we do at least. Lastly, it'll be unfair if I finish any Motilal Oswal AMC presentation without giving you a glimpse of our toolkit called QGLP. I always get asked, how did you guys come to think about this? And a lot of people think this is a marketing tool, but this is not. If you go through the 23 years or 25 years of wealth creation study of Ramdevji, all of these are nothing but a summation of that wealth creation study, right? So just to illustrate that, I've put all the wealth creation studies relevant to the framework of QGLP. And I think if, so what are these, right? These are basically the Western style of investment management frameworks of great investors. We've taken those and we have Indianized them, right? That's basically what it is. All these books are available for free. I think it's a treasure trove for any investor who's interested in learning about markets or what are the frameworks that we use. So for quality, I think the last wealth creation study that we did was very powerful, which was on forensics, financial shenanigans, how companies try and dupe us as investors. One line that we read in one of the books was very simple but very effective, which said that most people or most smart companies try to credit P&L and debit balance sheet, right? They try and show earnings and depress their cash flows, because in bull markets, all of us are just looking at earnings and not cash flows. So various frameworks, which pertain to every facet of QG and LNP. And in the middle, I have put a study that we did on allocation. I think it's very, very important, the study on allocation. A lot of us, get very happy when one of our stock goes up 2 times or 3 times. But I always ask myself, how much money did I put in, right? And if the answer is 1% or 2%, then it doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't matter. So, the fact that why is Don Bradman the greatest batsman cricket has ever seen, somebody asked him, why are you great? He said, others got out, I just didn't get out. Right? So it's like that. If you don't allocate enough on a great high conviction idea or a fund, it will not matter to your wealth, frankly. Yeah. So I think this is again a very interesting study available, worth a read for all of you. So that's all I had to speak about. Took about 30 minutes. Thank you. These are two of the cartoons that I see every day in the morning when I get up. They're inspirational to me, and I think they kind of sum up what we have to do in equity investing. The left is that we be the black sheep among all the white sheep, which is go against the tide, right? Investing is nothing but going against the crowd at a certain level, right? If everybody's buying large caps, can you buy mid and small caps? When everybody's buying mid and small caps, can you buy large caps? It's in a way like that. And the second is a little bit what Kamal said at the beginning, saying that if you believe that equity is a place where you will make money, then don't think about the timing. You have to just go and sit in equities, and at some point you will make money. So on this note, thank you for your patient listening. I'll hand it back to Kamal. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Sushmit. So the presentation was really good. Today is the day.
Thank you.
Today's day is the day. As everybody was expecting market to fall, and maybe after a long period of time, we are back to levels of 10,800. Markets have fallen to 50 points today, and there have been a couple of questions around it. So, what
Yeah.
are your views? Why? How do you see this correction?
So I don't want to say it's healthy because I don't think any correction is healthy, right? No correction is healthy. No, I think one of the things that has intrigued me in the last 2-3 weeks when the market was in a tear was I was quite nervous to the fact that we are only 6 or 8 weeks away from U.S. elections, right? Somehow, thanks to COVID again, we have forgotten that one of the world's biggest geopolitical event is upon us on the 3rd of November. And if you go and look back data, about 2 months before any US elections, the volatility in the market increases tremendously. So I think it's a manifestation of that. It's a closer election than we all thought. There are a lot of the big newspapers in the US are saying that you may not even come to know the result on 3rd of November, right? When the counting happens, there might be a lot of debate and dispute, and maybe there's uncertainty about who will become the US president for 2-3 weeks, right? So I think the fact that the president of US is going to be elected in 6 weeks, and we still don't know who is going to be, kind of is maybe the reason for the volatility that we are seeing.
So, for any equity investor who has a long-term horizon, what are the 5 sectors that you kind of want to highlight in the context of the framework that you presented for having maybe a sound return, sound portfolio?
Right. So, as I briefly touched upon some of the sectors as well. So I think healthcare is a sector. It's a very large term that I'm using. So in a way, it encompasses broadly 2 sectors. One is this whole pharmaceutical hospitals and what we traditionally call healthcare, and the second is insurance. I think that's more healthcare than financials. So I think these are 2 sectors that to me look set for a good 5-10 year run in India. The third sector that I really like currently is this whole real estate space. Not necessarily buying developers, but you could buy this entire ecosystem of real estate, which is you could buy sanitary ware companies, you could buy tiles, just the whole volume. I think the fact that EMIs are down. I don't know if you saw this presentation by HDFC Limited where they said that the affordability index of a customer in India to buy a real estate is at a 25-year high, right? Now, imagine you put that with the fact that you have low EMI and the fact that developers now have to sell at a price that they have to sell at a price that the customers will buy and not necessarily at some profit margin. You have a massive boom in real estate volumes, right? So I think 5-6 years of real estate volume boost could do very well for companies like, sectors like sanitary ware, tiles, AC, switches, so on and so forth, right? So that's the third, I would say, sector that looks very interesting to us. The fourth sector is, I think, mobility. Two-wheeler, four-wheeler. I think they are going to see a resurgence in the next 3-4 years. The last 3 years has been very, very tough for this industry. Very, very tough, right? Whether it be shared mobility impact, whether it be BS4 to BS6. I mean, ABS, insurance cost. I mean, everything that could go wrong with the sector went wrong in 2 years, correct? Uh, and I think nothing else, it doesn't look like anything else can go wrong to the magnitude it went for the next 2 years. And the feeling that now I need to own my own transport because I don't know if Ola and Uber is reliable anymore, or I don't want to travel in public transport anymore. So if you combine the fact that you've had bad 3 years, people want to be independent in their mobility. You could have a big boom in two-wheeler, four-wheeler as well. So I think these are the four sectors that to us look very, very interesting right now. The fifth one is rural, but frankly, I have not done a lot of work on it yet. It's a sector that most investors have not looked at for the last 15 years or 20 years. So, but I think the reform is very, very big. It's very, very big. Uh, it's not a small reform at all. I think it's a big reform. We need to pay heed to it. The good thing about any big reform is you get enough time to study and to take your choice because typically these reforms, the runways for 10 years or 15 years. They are not 1 year runways.
Right. Last, 12, 13 years have actually shown the decline in the corporate earnings. We have seen they're declining from, highs of 8% in 2008 to kind of all-time lows of 3.5%, where they are today. So, what are your views? What are the drivers do you see? Because unless and until these corporate earnings actually go up, the fundamental reason for prices to sustainably remain up or go up doesn't look like. And that is what I think has kept many rational investors away from equities for last 6 months. We have seen
Correct.
many, novice or new investors, or maybe, brave hearts who have actually invested, or investors, who kind of understood the equity markets thoroughly. They may have invested, but investors who study valuations, who study these numbers of earnings, they were the ones who kind of were not convinced and they missed this rally. But now when markets are falling, again there is an opportunity. The question in front of them whether they should enter or not. They will again be watchful of actually the potential of earnings. So, what are your views in this regards? What are the drivers, that one should kind of look forward to make up one's mind in this regards?
Yeah. Great question, Kamal. I think there are. I'll give you an historical context to this. It is not like this has happened to us for the first time, right? And I think that is what is very important to understand. We've practically had no growth in Nifty earnings for the last 6 years, right? This happened to us from 1997 to 2003 as well, right? Interestingly, both these times the culprit was the same sector, which is financial. Okay. Even at that time, because a lot of banks were not listed, then people may not remember, but PSU banks NPA had spiked to 16%, right? And the same thing, the cleanup process had to happen. It took them 4 years, and financial sector was the culprit even from 97 to 2003. So I think first and foremost is nearly 40 to 45% of the deterioration of 8 to 3% in corporate profit to GDP is because of the financial sector, right? And I think if you listen to whatever the SBI chairman has to say, he says that the credit cost coming out of this crisis may not be as much as you guys think. So he said that everybody thought it's going to be 5%. He's saying I can't see it going beyond 2%. Right? Today is what he said that. Now, if that actually happens at 2%, you will have a massive earnings recovery from FY22 itself, right? Because you don't need to provide as much as you used to provide, right? So the whole system changes immediately. And please remember, in the last 3-4 years, we've all complained about no credit growth. So if you don't have credit growth, you don't have credit cost also, right? You can't say that I didn't have credit growth for the last 4 years and I'm going to have credit cost because of that. So I think if I have to go by what SBI chairman said, then I think you could have a massive earnings uplift from FY22 itself, coming from only from the financial sector. The other two sectors that did very well for India from 2003 to 10 and were metals and oil and gas, right? It is unlikely that these two sectors are going to come back. Having said that, we have a couple of new stars. Like IT has finally become a very, very big profit pool, and it looks like it's growing at 10-12%. So that can take up some of the metal base. And we have consumer, which has finally become a large sector, right? So I think if you ask me personally, financial sector, if as soon as you see that the credit cost coming out of COVID is less than 2.5-3%, you can be rest assured that FY22 will be a massive earnings bump for the country.
Right. So, in your top five sectors that you kind of discussed, you have not talked about IT as a sector, which we have seen,
Yeah.
over given the COVID, a lot of people have started to do their business differently, and the kind of valuations IT companies are commanding worldwide. What are your views on IT sector in that regards in the current context? If one, because I see a lot of investors, they have allocation recently added to pharma, to insurance, to FMCG, right? They always had allocation to financials, but there are portfolios where investors have low allocation to IT, and now IT has run up. But what are the views, in this regards on IT as a sector?
Correct. So I think firstly we have to differentiate between what we see in Nasdaq and what we see in India, right? They're like completely different. I would say they're like Earth and Mars, right? Those are product companies, those are SaaS companies. They're very different animals altogether. India is, I would call, they are the office or the mid office of the world, right? Indian IT companies are the mid office of the world. They will engine room, right? If you tell them that, I need my website to go online, they are the engine room which will make sure that your website goes online, right? And I think the is that during COVID, to me, the biggest achievement of the Indian IT sector has been that the Indian IT sector has shown that we are not only cheaper, but we are better in quality, right? To deliver 95% or 98% uptime in a complete lockdown scenario, able to ship, able to make 95% of your employees, enable them to work from home. I don't think, if I had asked you pre-COVID, you think you can run your life without going to office, your answer would have been no, right? But I think Indian IT companies at 2 lakh, 3 lakh, 4 lakh people have shown that they can do it. And I think that is the biggest change for Indian IT companies in the outlook in the world, right? Somebody very famously once told me that the first time you come to India to give an IT outsourcing contract, you come for price. And the third time you come, you stay for quality. Right. So I think that's what is going to happen to Indian IT. I think we are up for a massive 5-year, 6-year run in IT as well. Having said that, the only problem that I have always faced with IT is you have to be very, very cognizant about the fact that your biggest market is still America. We have not done a great job of diversifying away from it. And as long as you have confidence that America as a country will continue to do well, I think it's a great investment opportunity.
So, putting yourself in investor's shoe, if you are to kind of make up your mind to invest for next 10 years, what are the factors that you will keep in mind in terms of, reforms that you see, which were disruptive and which actually happened in last 5 years, which, are there to remain for good for long, and which will become drivers or levers for the next rally once the near term, turmoil is kind of over. So if you go back and think and try to analyze it rationally, that yes, today COVID happened, and geopolitical stress has happened, elections are to happen, all these uncertainties are to get over, but with time they will be over. The facts will be ultimately determined by what are the economic fundamentals, and economic fundamentals would depend upon how reforms have happened and how those reforms will play. So fundamentally, if you are to analyze what are the three, four, five key disruptive, reforms or levers or drivers or risks, could be on negative side also that come to your mind, which you will kind of rationally analyze while deciding to now invest in equities if markets correct the way they are correcting over next say 1 month.
No, so it's unfortunate that whenever India does reforms, a crisis hits us, right? Same thing happened with us in 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. We were doing all this crisis, all these reforms, and suddenly .com bust, right? Everything went to shatter. Everybody thought that why are we even doing reforms? Same thing is happening now. When GST was being introduced, everybody said, why are we not doing it better? Why are we not doing it faster? It'll add 1%, 2%, 3% to GDP. And once GST was implemented, everybody said, why did we do GST? Right? So I think once things normalize, as and when that happens, I think GST, IBC. I think you have to come from a business family to understand the importance of IBC, right? What Surfacey did for retail lending in India, I think IBC will do for corporate lending in India, right? Before Surfacey, you could take a loan and walk away, and nobody could do anything with you, right? So that's why there was no personal loan segment in India. But once Surfacey came, you cannot walk away. They can confiscate your vehicle or your property or your car. And I think IBC is like that. Now the promoters are scared. Earlier, most promoters thought that equity is mine and bank debt is not to be repaid, right? So I have 100% equity in a way. So I think GST, IBC, RERA. I can't tell you how big this can become if the way it's going, it continues to go, right? Imagine in India, the largest ticket spend of any individual is real estate, correct? And till now, that has been unorganized, correct? From tomorrow, and suddenly it becomes organized. It just changes the whole equation, the game, everything, right? You go from buying a property of your uncle's friend or friend's uncle to buying it from a Godrej or an Oberoi or a Shobha or a Prestige because they are good developers, right? Not because they are friends or family, right? So I think RERA is again very, very big, and it's evident, right? I don't know if you saw Godrej sold 15, Godrej booked 1500 crores worth of sales in Q1. Zero site visit, zero, all online, right? So that kind of shows what can happen with RERA. I think RERA is very, very big. And see, it's not like I'm not saying real estate market will go from 10% of GDP to 20% of GDP. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it'll remain at 10% of GDP, but the 10% will go from 99% unorganized to 70, 80% organized. Correct? And that's only if you organize something will stock market be able to invest and make money. Correct. So I think very, very big reform, RERA. The fourth is agri. All of us are very disconnected from that reform because most of us don't have any connection to villages or large farmers. But if you even pick up a phone and speak to 3 companies or 4 companies who are in this space, 90% of the reaction will be that I can't even believe it's happened. And then once they're overcome with that emotion, they'll say if it's really implemented, it is just changing the game completely. Right. And fifth is what I was in a conference today, and Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman said that very soon you will see the cabinet passing the public sector enterprise bill, right? And I can't believe again, that they'll do that, which basically says that no sector, except 1 or 2, will have more than 4 public sector enterprises, right? So things are happening, but the unfortunate part is, I had read this article written by Mr. Dr. Subir Gokaran a few years ago. He said India is what he calls the chicken neck problem, right? So you build Bandra Worli Sea Link, right? High speed, you can connect from Bandra to Worli in 7 minutes, but then there's a traffic jam because the whole sea link comes into a chicken neck once you take the U-turn, right? So you cover 95% of the distance 7 minutes, and for the last 5% you spend 30 minutes, right? So India is in a way like that. We don't we build with the right intentions, but because it's a democracy, it kind of always comes again into a chicken neck, and then again we have to do some more reforms. So it's like that right now. but the spring effect will be crazy. That these are the positives. The negative that I think is just the complete leverage in the global markets. I have no idea how they come out of all this. The debt to GDP of developed economies is at levels seen only in World War II. So, and we know that whenever there is excess leverage, there are only two ways to come out of excess leverage. Either you devalue your currency or you have inflation, right? There's no other third way to get out of a debt problem. So to me, if you ask me, that is the biggest risk, but macro has always been a tough subject. But I'm very, very bullish on India. I think this is really the decade of India. We'll go from $2.5 trillion to $5 trillion GDP, only the fourth country to do it. We are all very lucky to be right now, right here.
Right. Sushmin, this is the last question. So with regards to the presentation that you had made, around forming the post-pandemic portfolio or anti-fragile portfolio, for long-term wealth creation, within that portfolio, I'm sure the way you had discussed various sectors, various ratios, you will be picking businesses which will be at, not low valuations. They will be at high valuations. How will you apply, for example, the PEG ratio that you spoke about for some of actually high value businesses like Asian Paints, Nestle, which are businesses which are at very high valuations? Will you tweak some of these ratios fundamentally to kind of make them to give them space in your portfolio, or you would want to kind of look out towards broader markets to find out some rare possibilities where they are anti-fragile, they are kind of post-pandemic anti-fragile businesses, as well as not available at very high valuations?
Yeah, I think Kamal, you answered the question. In India right now, mid cap and small caps are like bad words, right? But I always joke that not every mid cap company is a large cap which became a mid cap, and not every small cap company is a mid cap which became a small cap, right? Everybody thinks that mid cap and small caps are destined to be mid caps and small caps forever. People forget that nearly 95% of large caps are either small caps or mid caps at some point in their lives. So if you want to build a post-pandemic portfolio and you want to be completely within the rules of the guardrails, you have to be capitalization agnostic, right? Warren Buffett said that a good company does not know whether it's a mid cap, small cap, or a large cap, right? We or SEBI tell the company ki you are a mid cap, you're a large cap, you're a small cap. So, as long as you understand why the company is a mid or a large or a small, and it has all the attributes that we enlisted, we have no problems in buying, right? We don't want to make an exception because of the fact that it is a large cap, right? Here is, as an investor, as a practitioner, as a fund manager, we have other constraints of liquidity, size of the fund, etc., etc. But if you were to tell me that you have, you can do a small fund and do something about it, then I will be cap agnostic, right? Because it's amazing to see that people think small caps is a bad word, right? And that is where, you remember 2017, right, Kamal, where everybody thought that Nifty is a bad word and small and mid caps is the only place to invest, correct? Today you see the opposite, right? Small and mid caps are the bad word. Nifty is the only place to invest. So, that's where you get the opportunities, right? You had opportunities in large caps in 2017, and I think you have opportunities in small and mid caps today.
Right, Sushmit. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
All the very best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Stay safe. Thank you.